I was asleep on a night bus. When the zombie epidemic hit the highway, I want you to understand something before I tell you any of this. I was nobody. I need you to sit with that. Because every survival story you've ever heard starts with someone who had a reason to live, or a wife, a daughter, a career, a dog, something. I had a half-charged phone, a duffel bag with 3 days of dirty laundry, and a Greyhound ticket from Bakersfield to Portland that cost me $62. I was 23 years old. I had dropped out of community college for the second time. I was going to crash on my cousin Derek's couch until I figured out what to do next, which, if I'm being honest, was the same plan I'd had for 2 years running. I was not a hero. I was not resourceful. I was the guy who fell asleep before the bus even pulled out of the station because I'd been up for 30 hours playing a game on my laptop that I don't even want to name because it's that embarrassing. The bus was a red-eye. Departed Bakersfield at 11:40 p.m., scheduled to hit Sacramento by 4 a.m., then carry on through Redding and into Oregon by morning. There were maybe 30 passengers. I had a window seat 3 rows from the back, and the only reason I remember that detail is because of what that position meant later. The seat next to me was empty. Across the aisle, an older woman in a green parka had already pulled a sleep mask over her eyes before we left the depot. 2 rows ahead of me, a man in a denim jacket was reading something on a tablet, its bluish glow the only light in his row. I didn't speak to anyone. I didn't look at anyone long enough to notice anything else. I balled up my hoodie against the window, pressed my forehead to it, and dropped into the kind of sleep you only get when you're too exhausted to dream. I don't know exactly what time it was when the first thing went wrong. I know it was after Sacramento because I have a dim, half-conscious memory of the bus idling, doors hissing, bodies shuffling on and off. New passengers boarded. The air changed colder, a draft of valley night cutting through the cabin before the doors sealed again. I shifted in my seat, pulled my hoodie tighter, and sank back under. Whatever happened in Sacramento, I slept through it. I slept through the next 90 minutes of Interstate 5 like the dead. And I use that word deliberately now, though I wouldn't have then. What woke me was the swerve. Not a gentle lane correction. A full torso lurch that threw me against the window hard enough to leave a bruise on my temple. I'd still have a week later. The bus tires screamed that high, shearing rubber sound that doesn't belong to cautious driving. Luggage shifted in the overhead bins. Someone 3 rows ahead yelped. The older woman across the aisle grabbed her armrest with both hands, her sleep mask shoved crookedly up onto her forehead, her eyes wide and confused and immediately afraid. The driver corrected. The bus straightened. For about 4 seconds, there was just the hum of highway and the collective held breath of 30 strangers. Then the driver hit the brakes so hard the seatbelt I wasn't wearing became a problem. I slid forward and caught myself on the seat ahead of me. My phone launched off my lap and skittered under the seat in front. The overhead lights flickered on that harsh, medicinal fluorescent that turns everyone into a ghost. And in that ugly light, I saw the highway through the massive front windshield for the first time. Cars were stopped, not pulled over, stopped, across all lanes. Some had their doors open. Some had headlights still on, pointed at odd angles, illuminating guardrails and embankment grass and the shapes of people standing in the road who were not standing the way people stand. Their posture was wrong. Their movement was wrong. One of them turned toward our headlights, and even from 30 rows back, I could see the dark stain covering the entire front of their shirt. The driver said something I couldn't hear. The woman across the aisle whispered, "Oh my God." I didn't say anything. I just sat there, stupid, blinking, with a crease from my hoodie still imprinted on my cheek. The driver's name was Gerald. I know that because it was printed on a small placard above his seat that I would read probably 40 times over the next 2 hours, each time hoping the letters would rearrange into some kind of instruction. Gerald did not panic. I want to give him that. He put the bus in park, killed the headlights, and that decision alone might have bought us the first critical minutes, and picked up his radio handset. I could hear the static from where I sat. He tried 3 channels. Nothing came back but dead air and a faint rhythmic clicking that sounded automated, like a system pinging into a void. A man near the front stood up, tall, broad, wearing a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled. He had the energy of someone who'd been in charge of things his entire life: youth sports, HOA meetings, the grill at the family reunion. His voice carried. "What's going on up there? Why are we stopped?" Gerald didn't turn around. "Sit down, sir. I need everyone to stay seated. There's cars all over the road. Are we in an accident zone? Is someone calling 911? Sir, sit down." The man didn't sit. He moved toward the front, one hand bracing against each headrest as he walked the aisle. His name, I'd learn later, was Craig Rydell, 46, sales territory manager for a plumbing supply company, traveling to Reading to visit his ex-wife and their 2 kids. Craig reached the front, looked through the windshield at what Gerald was looking at, and stopped talking. That's the detail that scared me, not the scene outside. The silence of a man who had walked up ready to manage the situation, and then simply had nothing to say. A young woman 2 rows ahead of me stood next. She was maybe my age, dark hair pulled back, wearing a college hoodie, UC Davis. She didn't head for the front. She pressed her face to her window and looked out at the highway's shoulder. After a moment, she turned to no one in particular and said, "There's someone eating something on the ground out there." Nobody asked her to clarify. She looked at me. I don't know why. Maybe because I was the nearest face. Her eyes were sharp, almost clinical. "Did you see it?" I shook my head. I hadn't looked out my window yet. Some part of me, some cowardly animal part that I'd like to say I've outgrown, but haven't, was telling me not to look. If I didn't look, the bus was just stopped in traffic. If I didn't look, the problem was mechanical, bureaucratic, a jackknifed semi, a construction detour. If I didn't look, I could stay in the world I'd fallen asleep in. She looked at me like she could read every line of that calculation on my face. "You should look," she said. Her name was Nina Chow. Pre-med, 2nd year, heading home to Medford, Oregon for her younger brother's birthday. She was the first person on that bus to understand what was happening outside. And she was the last person who deserved what I eventually did to her. I looked. The shoulder of Interstate 5 was lit in fragments by the scattered headlights of stopped vehicles. In one cone of light, a sedan sat with its driver door open, the dome light revealing an empty seat smeared dark. In another, a pickup truck had drifted into the drainage ditch, its rear wheels still spinning slowly. Between the cars, figures moved with a quality I can only describe as dedicated. Not running, not walking with purpose. Moving the way water moves toward a drain without decision, without hesitation, pulled by something below thought. One of them was crouched over a shape on the asphalt, and its shoulders were working in a repetitive, rocking motion that I will not describe further because you already know. And because I still see it when I close my eyes, in dark rooms. I pulled back from the window. "Okay," I said, which was the stupidest possible response, and also the only honest one, because nothing in my life had prepared me to say anything smarter. Within 5 minutes, The bus had reorganized itself the way groups always do, not by plan, but by gravity. Craig stayed at the front with Gerald, the two of them speaking in low tones, Craig's hands on his hips, Gerald's on the wheel. Nina moved seat to seat on the left side, looking out each window to build what she called a perimeter picture. The older woman across from me, her name was Dolores, and she told me this unprompted, the way some people introduce themselves when they're scared, as if their name is a tether to the world. Stayed in her seat and gripped her purse like a flotation device. The new passengers who'd boarded in Sacramento occupied the middle of the bus. A mother with a boy who looked about 9. A wiry man in mechanic's coveralls with the name Ito stitched on the chest. A pair of college-aged guys in matching track jackets who turned out to be brothers Dylan and Marcus Webb, heading to a friend's wedding in Ashland. They sat together, whispering, their phones out, neither phone finding a signal. And then there was the man in 7A window seat, left side, about 5 rows from the front. He'd boarded in Sacramento, and he was sitting very still with his head tilted against the glass. He hadn't reacted to the swerve, the braking, or the lights. His stillness was so complete that it took on weight, became a presence of its own. I noticed him only because Nina noticed him first. She came back down the aisle, leaned toward me, and said quietly, "The guy in 7A, has he moved at all?" I hadn't been watching. I don't know. He hasn't. Not once. Not even when we braked. Maybe he's a heavy sleeper. She gave me a look that made me feel like I'd just handed in a wrong answer on a quiz I should have studied for. "Go check on him." Why me? Because I'm building the perimeter picture and Craig's talking to the driver and everyone else is scared and you're just sitting here. There it was. The first honest assessment of my role on that bus. The guy who was just sitting there. She wasn't cruel about it. She was efficient. And she was right. I was the most useless person in the cabin, which made me the most available. I stood up. My legs felt strange, not weak, but unconvinced, as though my body was submitting a formal objection to what my brain was asking it to do. I walked up the aisle, passing Dolores, who watched me with the expression of someone observing a nature documentary where the gazelle makes a questionable choice. The mother in the middle section pulled her son closer as I passed, not because of me, but because movement itself had become suspicious. I reached row 7. The man in 7A was maybe 50, heavy-set, wearing a gray polo shirt. His head rested against the window at an angle that didn't look comfortable. His eyes were closed, his hands were in his lap. On the back of his left hand, just below the knuckle line, there were 3 parallel scratches, shallow, ragged, partially scabbed. They could have come from anything. A cat, a thorn bush, a fence. "Hey," I said. My voice came out reedy, pathetic. I cleared my throat. "Hey, man, you okay?" He didn't respond. I looked back at Nina. She was standing in the aisle near row 12, watching. She made a small motion with her hand to go on. I reached out and touched his shoulder. His polo shirt was damp, not soaked. Damp the way a shirt gets when someone's been sweating in their sleep during a fever. The heat coming off him was immediate, radiating through the fabric like an engine block. I pulled my hand back. "He's burning up," I said, loud enough for Nina to hear. Craig's voice from the front. "What's going on back there?" And beneath my hand, so faint I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it, the man in 7A exhaled a sound that wasn't quite a groan and wasn't quite a word. It was wet, guttural, the kind of sound a body makes when the person inside it is no longer entirely in charge. I stepped backward into the aisle and almost tripped over my own feet. Here is what I want to say about fear. It doesn't make you sharp. Every movie, every show, every story they tell you, adrenaline kicks in, your senses heighten. You become something more than you were. That's a lie, or at best a half-truth applicable to a specific kind of person. And I was not that kind of person. Fear made me slow. It put cotton in my ears and gauze over my eyes. When I stumbled back from the man in 7A, my first clear thought was about my duffel bag in the overhead bin, and whether my laptop was going to get stolen, because my brain was shopping for any problem it already knew how to solve. Nina was beside me in seconds. She moved past me, leaned over the aisle seat in row 7, and studied the man with a focus I associated with people who deal with bodies professionally. She didn't touch him. She looked at his hands, his neck, the condensation pattern his breath had left on the window glass. "His breathing is about 40 a minute," she said. "Way too fast. And those scratches are infected. See the red tracking up toward his wrist?" I saw it. A thin red line crawling from the wounds up the vein path of his forearm, visible even in the bad fluorescent light. "We need to move everyone behind row 10, she said. "We don't know what." "Yes, we do." She looked at me, and I realized her clinical composure wasn't calm. It was the result of a decision to skip every stage of processing and go straight to response. She was terrified. She was just terrified, efficiently. Whatever is happening outside is happening inside this bus in about 20 minutes if we don't isolate him. Craig arrived, filling the aisle with his broad frame. "Is the man sick?" "He's febrile and unresponsive with open wounds that show signs of septic tracking," Nina said. "We need to get everyone to the back half of the bus and create a buffer." "You a doctor?" "Pre-med. Close enough for a Greyhound at 2 in the morning." Craig looked at the man in 7A, then at the highway beyond the windshield. Decision calculus moved across his face, the visible machinery of a man weighing options he'd never been trained for. "All right, I'll talk to people. We move everyone back of row 12. He turned and started up the aisle, and for a moment it was just me and Nina standing in the dim corridor of the bus, the sick man's rapid breathing the only sound. She looked at me again, this time with something softer, a brief lapse in her efficiency. "What's your name?" she asked. Eli Marsh." "I'm Nina. Eli, I need you to understand what's going to happen. That man is going to turn. Maybe not in 10 minutes, maybe not in 30, but he's going to turn. And when he does, we're in a closed metal tube on a highway full of more of them. So, whatever you're good at, now would be the time." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because the honest answer to "whatever you're good at" was absolutely nothing applicable to this situation. I was good at sleeping late. I was good at starting things and not finishing them. I was good at letting other people handle logistics while I found a corner to exist in quietly. My mother had once described me, during an argument I deserved, as someone who, watches his own life like it's on television. "I can watch the guy," I said. "I'll sit in row 9 and watch him. If he moves, I'll yell." Nina nodded, and I could see her filing me into a category limited utility, low initiative, manageable. She headed back toward Craig to help reorganize passengers. I sat down in 9C, aisle seat, facing forward, with a direct line of sight to the back of the sick man's head. My job was to watch, to sit and watch. It was, I understood with grim clarity, the role I'd been rehearsing for my entire life. The man in 7A breathed his fast, wet breaths, and I watched. Craig was a natural organizer. The kind of person who could walk into chaos and start assigning seats. Within 10 minutes, everyone had been moved behind row 12. Gerald stayed in the driver's seat. He refused to leave it, saying the engine needed to stay ready. The mother, whose name was Patricia, sat in row 14 with her son, Marco, who had not spoken a single word since I'd first noticed him. Dolores relocated to row 15, directly behind Patricia, maintaining her grip on her purse. The Webb brothers took row 16, Dylan by the window, Marcus on the aisle. Ito, the mechanic, sat in row 13, and I noticed he'd taken a tire iron from somewhere, maybe the bus's emergency kit, and laid it across his knees without comment. Nobody questioned it. Nobody wanted to question it. Craig positioned himself in row 12, the front line of our pathetic little barricade, which was nothing more than 5 empty rows of bus seats and the collective agreement that the man in 7A was a problem we were going to watch from a distance. I remained in row 9. Nobody asked me to. Nobody told me to come back. I just stayed, because I'd said I would watch, and because moving to safety felt like it required a social negotiation I didn't have the energy for. This is who I was. Not brave, inert. There's a difference that matters, and I need you to understand it now so that what comes later makes sense. Nina moved between the groups, collecting information. She established that no one had cell service. She confirmed the bus radio was dead. She inventoried what people had: water bottles, snacks, a first aid kit from the overhead compartment near the driver, 2 flashlights, Ito's tire iron, and a box cutter that Dylan Webb produced from his jacket pocket with the sheepish energy of someone who'd forgotten it was there. She compiled all of this in a small notebook she pulled from her backpack, writing in neat, rapid handwriting that I would later recognize as the same penmanship on her brother's birthday card, which she never got to deliver, at 2:47 a.m. I know the time because I kept checking my phone like it was a rosary the man in 7A moved. Not much. A shift of his head, a realignment of his neck that rolled his face from the window toward the aisle. His eyes were still closed, but his mouth was open now, and the breathing had changed. Slower, deeper, a thick, crackling undertone on each inhale, like something in his chest was rearranging. He moved, I said, not yelling, just projecting toward row 12. Craig stood. Moved how? Turned his head. Breathing's different. Nina came up the aisle, stopping at row 10. She listened. I watched her count breaths against her watch. He's down to about 12 a minute. Respiration's depressing. Is that good? I asked. It's what happens before the body resets. She paused. In the videos that were going around last week, before the broadcasts stopped, the fever spikes, breathing goes rapid, then it drops, then what? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. We both looked at the man in 7A, his chest rising and falling with mechanical slowness. And we both understood that we were watching a countdown with no visible numbers. We need to restrain him, she said. With what? Belts, bags, straps, anything. He's a person, Dolores said from 3 rows back, her voice thin but firm. He's a sick man on a bus. You can't tie him to a seat. Ma'am, Nina started. My husband was ill for 3 years. I sat beside him every day. You do not tie a sick person down like an animal. The bus went quiet. Not because Dolores was wrong. Because she was operating from a world that had ended somewhere between Bakersfield and Sacramento. And none of us had the cruelty to tell her that directly. Patricia pulled Marco closer. Nina looked at me. Not at Craig, the leader. Not at Ito with his tire iron. At me, the watcher. Eli, she said, help me. We used the straps from my duffel bag in Nina's backpack, plus a bungee cord that Gerald passed back from the driver's compartment without looking. I held the straps while Nina worked, looping them around the man's torso and the seat back, pulling them snug across his chest. His body was slack, cooperative in the way only unconsciousness allows. His skin was so hot that the heat registered through the polo fabric like a warning, the body's last flare before something fundamental changed. The scratches on his hand had darkened. The red tracking up his forearm had reached the crook of his elbow. While we worked, Dolores wept quietly. Not for the man she didn't know him, for the principle, for the world where you didn't strap a stranger into a seat on a Greyhound bus while his body burned itself into something else. I understood her grief. I shared it. In the vague, unhelpful way I shared most things passively, without acting on it. We finished. The man was secured, or as secured as nylon straps and a bungee cord could make him. Nina tested each binding, then stepped back, breathing hard. There was sweat on her forehead despite the cold leaking through the bus windows. "That won't hold him if he's strong," she said. "How strong do they get?" The videos showed a woman in Phoenix flipping a car door off its hinges. She wiped her forehead with her sleeve. So, not strong enough. Craig called a meeting, which meant he stood in the aisle at row 12 and spoke to everyone behind him while Nina and I lingered ahead of the group. The agenda was simple: stay or go. The bus was a container walls, a roof, doors that sealed. But it was also a trap, parked in a clogged highway with a turning passenger and an army of infected outside. "I say we stay," Craig said. "Bus is solid. Doors lock. We wait for daylight, wait for authorities. National Guard, Highway Patrol, someone." "The radio's dead," Nina said from row 10. "Every station. There's no one coming." "You don't know that." "The entire highway is a parking lot of abandoned cars, and there are people outside eating each other. Whatever infrastructure would send help is dealing with the same thing everywhere." Craig's jaw tightened. He was not accustomed to being corrected, particularly by someone half his age. "So, what do you suggest? We walk out there? A woman, a kid, and a bunch of strangers on foot in the dark?" "I'm suggesting we plan for the scenario where no one comes." "I've got my kids in Reading," Craig said, and his voice cracked for the first time. Just a fracture, quickly sealed. "I'm not dying on a highway because a college student watched some videos." That landed. Nina absorbed it without visible reaction, but I saw her hand tighten on the seat back beside her. She turned and walked back toward me, past me, all the way to the rear of the bus, where she sat down in the last row and opened her notebook. I should have followed her. I should have said something to bridge the gap, to acknowledge that she was the only person on this bus operating with any clarity. Instead, I sat back down in row 9 and resumed my watch over the man in 7A because that was my job, and it required nothing of me beyond presence. The bus settled into an uneasy silence. Gerald kept the engine idling heat, he said, and the ability to move fast if needed. Ito sat with his tire iron. The Webb brothers took turns looking out the windows, reporting what they saw in fragments. A car alarm going off 300 yards ahead, shapes moving between vehicles, a distant sound that might have been a helicopter or might have been wind through an overpass. Marco, Patricia's son, spoke for the first time, quietly to his mother, in the way children deliver observations that adults spend hours trying to formulate. "Mom, the man in the front is going to wake up wrong." Patricia shushed him, but every adult on the bus heard it, and not one of us disagreed. At 3:22 a.m., the man in 7A opened his eyes. I know because I was looking directly at him when it happened. Not out of courage, out of the same inertia that had defined every meaningful moment of my life. I was there because I hadn't moved. His lids pulled back slowly, mechanically, like shutters on a timer. His irises were wrong. Not the color, I couldn't tell the color in that light, but the quality. They had a fixed, flat focus, the way a camera lens looks when it's pointed at you, but the person behind it is looking at the viewfinder, directed but empty. He didn't move. The restraints held him against the seat back, and for a long moment he just sat there, eyes open, staring at the seat in front of him. His breathing had stopped its crackling descent and settled into something steady, metronomic, without the natural variation of human respiration. In, out, like a bellows operated by something that had studied breathing but didn't understand its purpose. "He's awake," I said. I didn't yell. My voice came out flat, informational, as if I were reading a bus departure time. Craig stood. Ito stood. Nina appeared from the back of the bus, notebook still in hand. Everyone was on their feet now except Patricia, who pressed Marco's face into her shoulder so he couldn't see. The man's head turned, not toward a sound, not toward movement. It rotated toward the aisle with the smooth, undifferentiated sweep of a surveillance camera panning across a room. His eyes fixed on me specifically. 3 rows back, aisle seat, the closest living body. Something in his expression attempted recognition and failed. His mouth opened. The lower jaw extended further than it should have, tendons straining in his neck. And a sound came out, not a moan, not a growl, but a kind of pressurized exhalation, like air being pushed through wet clay. The straps creaked. "Everybody back," Nina said, her voice controlled but higher than before. "Past row 12, now." I didn't move. My legs had filed their objection, and this time it had been approved. I sat in 9C and watched the man in 7A test his restraints with a patience that was worse than violence. He didn't thrash. He pressed. A steady, incremental, hydraulic pressure against the nylon straps. His torso leaning forward millimeter by millimeter. His fingers curling around the armrests with a grip that turned his knuckles the color of bone. "Eli," Nina's voice, sharp now, "move." The bungee cord snapped first. The metal hook at one end pinged off the window and clattered to the floor. The loss of tension shifted the load to the bag straps, which groaned audibly, fibers separating under force they were never designed to bear. I moved. Not because of courage or survival instinct, but because Nina's voice cut through whatever paralysis had locked me in place. With the precision of a surgical instrument, I lurched backward out of row 9, stumbled into the aisle, and backpedaled toward the group. The second strap gave way as I passed row 11. The man stood, and the final strap, my own duffel bag strap, the one I'd carried since high school, slid off him like tissue paper. He was upright in the aisle, swaying slightly, his head moving in that terrible automatic sweep. The polo shirt was dark with sweat. His hands hung at his sides, fingers slightly curled. And I noticed with horrible clarity that his nails had split at the beds, as though his fingers had gripped something with force his own body couldn't sustain. He took a step toward us. Ito moved forward with the tire iron, positioning himself between the thing in the aisle and everyone behind him. He held the iron in a 2-handed grip, steady, the way a man holds a tool he's used 10,000 times. "Get behind me," Ito said. His voice was quiet, accented, utterly calm. He weighed maybe 150 pounds. The man in the aisle had 60 pounds on him at least. But Ito stepped forward, and the rest of us stepped back. And that arrangement told you everything about who we were. The thing that had been a man covered 3 rows in the time it took me to exhale. There was no build-up, no cinematic crouch and spring. One moment, it was swaying by row 7. The next, it was at row 10. Its hands reaching for Ito with fingers spread wide. And the sound it made was something I'll carry in my chest forever. A rising, aspirated shriek that wasn't anger or hunger, but something more mechanical, like a pressure valve releasing. Ito swung the tire iron. It connected with the side of the thing's head, with a sound like a mallet hitting a watermelon, through a towel. Dense, wet, final. The force of the blow redirected the thing's momentum into the seats on the left side. It crashed into row 10, folded over the armrest, and went still. For 2 seconds. Then it pushed itself back up. The left side of its head was misshapen, caved where the iron had landed. And the eye on that side had gone dark and motionless. But the right eye still tracked. The mouth still worked. It oriented on Ito again and lunged. Ito swung again, but the aisle was narrow and his backswing caught the overhead luggage bin. The iron glanced off the thing's shoulder, enough to stagger it, not enough to stop it. Its hands found Ito's coveralls, gripped the fabric at his chest, and pulled him forward with a strength that yanked the smaller man off his feet. Craig hit it from the side. Full body, football tackle energy, driving it into the window seats of row 9. Glass cracked but didn't break. The thing released Ito, turned on Craig, and bit down on the forearm he'd raised to protect his face. Craig screamed the first genuine scream on that bus, raw and animal, and stripped of every layer of composure he'd built in 46 years. Dylan Webb appeared with a box cutter. He drove it into the thing's neck, and dark fluid that wasn't quite the right color for blood sheeted down the gray polo. The thing released Craig's arm. Dylan stabbed again and again, and his brother Marcus was pulling Craig backward while Ito, back on his feet, brought the tire iron down on the thing's skull from above with both hands and everything he had. It dropped. It stayed down. This time, the stillness held. The bus was loud with breathing. Patricia was making a sound I'd never heard a person make it in a keening hum, low and constant, her hands locked over Marco's ears. Dolores had flattened herself between 2 seats, invisible. Gerald hadn't left the driver's seat, but I could see his face in the rearview mirror, gray as cement. Craig sat against the seats in row 13, cradling his right forearm. The bite was clear, a crescent of punctures through his rolled sleeve, blood welling in the pattern of human teeth. His face was white. He stared at his arm with the expression of a man reading a diagnosis he already knew was terminal. Nina knelt beside him. She opened the first aid kit, pulled out gauze, and began wrapping his arm without speaking. Her hands were steady. Her face was not. "It bit me," Craig said, as though he needed to hear himself confirm it. "I know. That means..." "We don't know exactly what it means." "We do. You said you watched the videos. You know what it means." Nina wrapped the gauze tighter. She didn't look up. She didn't answer. I stood in the aisle behind them, useless, my hands shaking at my sides, having contributed nothing to the fight that 3 other men had nearly died in. My role during the entire encounter had been to retreat, to back up, to watch as Ito, Craig, and Dylan did what I could not force my body to do. And now Craig was bitten, and I was untouched. And the math of that, the obscene unfairness of cowardice, being rewarded with safety, settled into my gut like a stone I would carry for every mile that followed. Ito wiped the tire iron on a seat cushion and sat down. Nobody cleaned up row 9. Nobody went near it. Nobody looked at me. Nina gave us 30 minutes. That was her estimate for how long we could stay on the bus before Craig's condition became a second crisis. She delivered this assessment standing in the aisle at row 12, speaking to everyone but watching Craig, who sat in row 14 with his wrapped arm cradled against his stomach and his eyes fixed on the dark window. "We need to leave the bus," she said. "We need to find a vehicle we can drive, something smaller, something we can navigate through the traffic, and we need to move." "Move where?" Marcus asked. "Off the highway, away from the concentration of infected. Every car on this road is a potential containment failure. We need open ground, or a structure we can secure." "There's a rest stop," Gerald said from the front. His first voluntary contribution in over an hour. "About 2 miles up, northbound side. I've driven this route 100 times. It's got a building, restrooms, vending machines, a maintenance office." 2 miles through that? Dylan pointed at the window, at the dark highway and its moving population. "The shoulder's partially clear on the right side," Nina said. "I've been watching. They're concentrated around the stopped vehicles, around the around activity. If we stay to the far shoulder, move quietly, stay tight." "With a kid?" Patricia's voice was the temperature of steel. "You want me to walk my 9-year-old son through 2 miles of that?" "I want your 9-year-old son to be alive in the morning. And staying on this bus won't guarantee that." The silence that followed had texture thick, suffocating, the kind of quiet that happens when everyone in a room knows the speaker is right and hates it. Craig spoke. "She's right." He looked up from his arm. His face had a strange serenity, the composure of a man who'd already made his peace with a conclusion. "I can feel it. My arm's hot. It's spreading. You need to go, and I need to not go with you." "Craig," Nina started. "Don't. I'm not asking for the speech. I've got maybe an hour before I'm like him." He nodded toward the crumpled form in row 9. "You get off this bus, you get to that rest stop, and you do not waste time on me. I'll stay with Gerald." Gerald said nothing. His silence was its own agreement. This was the moment where a better person would have spoken, would have offered something: comfort, protest, solidarity. Dylan put his hand on Craig's shoulder. Marcus looked away, blinking hard. Ito gave a single nod that contained more respect than any words I could have assembled. Even Dolores, from her seat, whispered something that sounded like a prayer. I said nothing. I thought about my duffel bag, still in the overhead bin near the front, and calculated whether it was worth retrieving. That's what was in my head while a man accepted his own death 3 feet from me. My luggage, my laptop, my dirty laundry, the interior dimensions of my own selfishness, which turned out to be more spacious than I'd ever imagined. Nina organized the exit. Gerald would open the front door. We'd descend single file, Ito first with the tire iron, then the Webbs, then Patricia and Marco, then Dolores, then me, then Nina at the rear. We'd stay on the right shoulder, move fast, stay quiet, no flashlights. The rest stop was 2 miles north. We'd make it in 40 minutes if we kept pace. Craig gave Nina his jacket. "For the kid," he said. "Nights get cold up here." She took it without argument. She handed it to Patricia, who wrapped it around Marco's shoulders. It hung past his knees. At 4:11 a.m., Gerald opened the bus door. The highway air flooded in, cold, tinged with diesel and something organic and sweet that I can still taste on the back of my tongue when the wind shifts a certain way. Ito descended the steps first, tire iron up, head swiveling. One by one, we followed him into the dark. Behind us, Craig sat alone in the fluorescent light, cradling his arm, watching us go. Gerald closed the door. The highway at night, during the end of everything, is the quietest, loud place you will ever experience. The silence is enormous. No traffic hum, no engine drone, no tire on asphalt white noise that you never notice until it's gone. Into that silence, every sound drops like a stone into still water. The click of Dolores's low heels on the pavement, the scuff of Marco's sneakers, the distant, arrhythmic percussion of a car alarm that had been crying for help for hours and was finally winding down to a series of intermittent chirps like a bird dying. We moved in a line along the right shoulder, single file, Ito leading. The moon was half full and uncommitted, giving just enough light to distinguish asphalt from gravel from grass. To our left, the highway spread like a river delta of stopped metal cars, trucks, an 18-wheeler jackknifed across 2 lanes, a motorcycle on its side with its headlights still burning a weak circle into the pavement. Between and among them, figures moved. I could see them in silhouette, in the gaps between vehicles, their movement pattern now familiar enough to recognize at a distance. That dedicated drift, that gravitational pull toward sound, toward warmth, toward whatever signal the living broadcast that the dead could read. Nina had been right about the shoulder. The infected were concentrated in the lanes, drawn to the vehicles and their former occupants. The shoulder, elevated slightly and separated by the rumble strip, was mostly clear. Mostly. Twice in the first half-mile, Ito raised his fist, and we froze once for a figure that stumbled across the shoulder 40 yards ahead and disappeared into the drainage ditch, and once for a shape that turned out to be a suitcase that had fallen from a car roof rack. Nobody spoke. Patricia carried Marco on her hip for the first quarter mile, then set him down when her arms gave out. The boy walked on his own, his hand in his mother's, Craig's jacket dragging on the ground behind him like a cape. He didn't cry. He didn't make a sound. His compliance was its own kind of heartbreak, a child who understood, on some primal level, that noise meant death, and had internalized the equation without being told. I walked behind Dolores, who moved with surprising determination for a woman in her 70s. Her low heels were a liability, and I watched her navigate the uneven shoulder with careful, deliberate steps, each one placed with the concentration of someone crossing a creek on stepping stones. At one point, she stumbled, and I caught her elbow. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't read: gratitude, maybe, or surprise that I was capable of even this minimal act of usefulness. "Thank you, honey," she whispered. I nodded. It was the most I'd contributed to anyone's survival in 3 hours. The mile marker signs counted our progress with cruel specificity. We'd passed mile 527 when we left the bus. The rest stop, Gerald had said, was near mile 529. Each sign took approximately 15 minutes to reach, which meant 45 minutes of walking exposed on a highway where the margin between life and death was measured in decibels. At mile 528, we encountered our first body that was not moving. It lay on the shoulder in a position that precluded sleep, face down. Arms at wrong angles, a dark spread beneath it that reflected the moonlight like oil. Ito stepped around it without pause. The webs followed. Patricia guided Marco to the far edge of the shoulder, her hand over his eyes, though the boy didn't try to look. Dolores crossed herself. I stepped over the shape with my eyes fixed on the middle distance, because looking down meant acknowledging that this had been a person on a highway going somewhere for a reason that no longer existed. Nina, behind me, paused briefly at the body. I heard her crouch, heard the rustle of her checking something, a pulse, a pocket, a detail I didn't ask about. Then she was up and moving again, closing the gap, her footsteps the last in our little chain of surviving strangers, walking through the end of the world on the shoulder of Interstate 5. The rest stop appeared as a low, dark shape set back from the highway on a slight rise. A parking area, half filled with vehicles in various states of abandonment. A rectangular building with a flat roof, the restroom and vending structure Gerald had described. Beyond it, a maintenance shed and what looked like a utility enclosure housing electrical panels. No lights. No movement visible from the highway, though distance and darkness conspired to make certainty impossible. Ito held us at the shoulder until he'd studied the approach for a full minute. Then he pointed to the building, traced a path from the shoulder through the parking area that used the parked vehicles as cover, and looked at Nina for confirmation. She nodded. He moved. We crossed the parking area in stages, vehicle to vehicle, like stones across a pond. The infected presence here was thinner two figures visible near the far end of the lot, both oriented away from us, both engaged in the purposeless wandering that seemed to be their default state when no stimulus drew them. We passed a minivan, with a child's car seat visible through the window, its straps hanging open and empty. I looked away, but not before the image embedded itself in the part of my memory that collects things I'll never be able to unfind. The building's main entrance was a glass door, shattered inward, a spray of cubed safety glass across the tile floor inside. Ito went through first, tire iron raised. The interior was dark, but navigable moonlight. Through the high windows showed a central corridor with restrooms on either side, a bank of vending machines along the far wall, and a door at the back marked Maintenance Authorized Personnel Only. The vending machines had been partially raided. One had its front panel pulled away, candy bars and chip bags scattered on the floor. The other, drinks, was intact, its LED display dead, but its contents visible through the glass. Nina herded everyone inside, then stationed Marcus at the broken front entrance with a box cutter and instructions to watch the parking lot. Dylan went to the vending machines and began extracting water bottles, passing them back silently. Patricia sat Marco on the tile floor in the corner near the women's restroom, wrapped him tighter in Craig's jacket, and sat beside him with her back to the wall and her arms around him. Dolores lowered herself onto a bench near the vending machines and finally released her purse, setting it beside her as though placing a beloved pet down for a nap. Her hands were trembling, not from cold. Ito tried the maintenance door. Locked. He studied the handle, wedged the flat end of the tire iron into the gap between door and frame, and applied leverage with the mechanical familiarity of a man who had opened reluctant things for a living. The lock gave with a snap, and the door swung open to reveal a small office, a desk, a chair, a pegboard with keys hanging from hooks, a first aid cabinet mounted on the wall, and, critically, a landline telephone on the desk. Nina picked up the phone, held it to her ear, set it down. Dead. Power's out, Ito said, examining the room. Whole grid, probably. There's a utility enclosure outside, Nina said. I saw electrical panels. If this building has a generator or a battery backup for emergency systems. I can check, Ito said. That's my work. Generators, electrical, engines. Not alone. I'll go with him, I said. The words came out of my mouth before my brain had authorized them. And the surprise on Nina's face confirmed that the offer was as unexpected to her as it was to me. I don't know why I said it. Guilt, maybe, for every minute I'd spent watching while others acted. Or the simpler, more shameful truth, that I wanted Nina to look at me differently. And I'd calculated that this was the cheapest bravery available. Okay, she said. And the way she said it, careful, neutral, with a faint undertone of reassessment, was the closest thing to a reward I'd earned all night. Ito handed me a flashlight, and headed for the back exit. I followed. The utility enclosure was a chain-link cage around a concrete pad holding 2 large electrical panels and a diesel generator the size of a washing machine. Ito examined the generator with a flashlight clamped between his teeth, his hands moving across the machinery with an intimacy that suggested a long relationship with combustion engines. He checked the fuel level, half a tank tested connections, primed the system, and pulled the starter cord. On the 3rd pull, it caught. The sound was enormous in the silence, a mechanical roar that felt like setting off a flare in a dark room. Ito immediately adjusted the choke, bringing the volume down to a rough idle. But the damage was done. Somewhere in the parking lot, I heard a sound respond. That wet, pressurized vocalization, distant but oriented. "Inside," Ito said. "Fast." We ran. Behind us, the generator settled into its rhythm, and I saw lights flicker inside the building, the emergency circuit kicking in, fluorescence stuttering to life in the corridor, the maintenance phone's display and a blinking awake. Nina had the phone to her ear before we'd cleared the doorway. She dialed, waited, dialed again. On the 4th attempt, someone answered. I couldn't hear the other end, but I watched Nina's face cycle through confusion, relief, and a focused intensity that meant she was receiving information. "Highway Patrol Emergency Relay," she said, covering the receiver. "Automated system. There's an evacuation corridor being established from the south. National Guard is clearing I-5 between Williams and Corning. Convoy pickup points are being designated at highway structures along the route." She listened again. "Next pickup is at the truck weigh station at mile 541. They're passing through at 6 a.m. That's..." She checked her watch. 90 minutes. "Mile 541, Marcus said from the doorway. "That's 12 miles from here." "Can we drive it?" Dylan asked. Every head turned to the parking lot. Cars with keys potentially in them, abandoned on asphalt. 12 miles of infected, choked highway between us and a convoy that would not wait. Ito was already moving toward the pegboard in the maintenance office. He took a set of keys marked with a tag that read, "Maint Van White Ford E350, walked out to the parking lot, and disappeared between vehicles. 2 minutes later, an engine started. Not the robust sound of a healthy machine, a grinding, reluctant, fuel-starved engine complaint, but it turned over, and Ito pulled a white Ford van around to the building's entrance. "Quarter tank," he reported through the open window. "Enough for 12 miles if we don't push it and God's feeling generous." Loading took 3 minutes. Patricia and Marco in the back seat. Dolores beside them, purse restored to her lap. The Webb brothers in the rear cargo area, sitting on coiled hoses and bags of road salt. Nina in the passenger seat, Ito driving, me in the middle row between Dolores and the sliding door, with nothing to carry and nothing to contribute except my continued existence. As Ito pulled out of the parking lot and turned north on the highway shoulder, I looked back at the rest stop. The lights we'd activated blazed from the building like a beacon. And in the parking lot, shapes were converging on the light, 3, 5, a dozen, drawn to the generator's hum and the fluorescent glow. We'd left a trap behind us, a lit room full of nothing, attracting the dead while the living drove away in the dark. I thought about Craig on the bus, sitting alone in his own fluorescent light, waiting for his body to betray him. 2 lit rooms behind us now, each one a sacrifice that bought us distance. Nina watched the side mirror. Her notebook was open in her lap, but she wasn't writing. She was tracking the shapes in the parking lot, counting them, filing the data in whatever internal system she used to process the unsurvivable. Marco fell asleep against Patricia's shoulder. In the middle of everything, in a stolen maintenance van on a dead highway. The boy fell asleep. Children understand something about survival that adults forget. When you can't do anything, you rest. I didn't rest. I watched the mile markers count upward and did math I already knew the answer to. Mile 533. The highway opened slightly, fewer stopped vehicles, wider gaps between the wreckage. Ito navigated with mechanical precision, weaving between abandoned cars on the shoulder, occasionally dipping onto the grass median when the shoulder clogged. The van's headlights were off. He drove by moonlight and the residual glow of vehicles whose batteries hadn't yet died. His hands were steady on the wheel. His eyes never stopped moving. At mile 535, we hit the blockage. An overturned semi had shed its cargo across all lanes and both shoulders pallets of bottled water. Split open. Thousands of plastic bottles scattered across the asphalt like strange eggs. The median beyond was a drainage culvert too deep for the van. The only path was through the debris field in the left lane, which meant crossing the full width of the highway through the densest concentration of infected we'd seen. Ito stopped the van. He looked at Nina. Nina looked at the debris field. "We walk this section," she said. 200 yards to clear the spill, then we find another vehicle on the other side." "We just got a vehicle," Dylan said from the back. "The vehicle can't pass. We can." Everyone exited in silence. Ito took point. Nina organized the line. Same order as before: Ito, the Webbs, Patricia and Marco, Dolores, me, Nina. Except this time, we weren't on an empty shoulder. We were crossing open highway, stepping over water bottles that rolled under our feet like ball bearings, exposed under the moon. The infected were present. I could see them among the stopped cars 50 yards to our right, maybe 8, maybe 12. Their outlines shifting between the vehicles in that dedicated, aimless drift. The spilled water bottles crunched and clattered underfoot no matter how carefully we stepped. Each sound felt like a shout. We were halfway across when Dolores fell. Her heel caught on a pallet slat hidden under the bottles. She went down hard, landing on her side with a cry she couldn't suppress, a sharp, instinctive yelp of pain that cut through the night air and hit every infected ear within 200 yards. Heads turned. That awful synchronous rotation, like a flock of birds changing direction, every dead face swiveling toward the sound. Then movement, not the drift, the other thing, the fast thing. Ito shouted, "Move, go, run!" I was closest to Dolores. She was on the ground, her ankle at an angle that meant she wasn't running anywhere. Her face twisted in pain and terror, her hand reaching up toward me. Her purse had spilled a wallet, a pill bottle, a photograph, a folded tissue, her whole life scattered among the water bottles. And here is where I tell you what I did. Because this is the part of the story where I become who I actually am. I ran. I left her on the ground. I turned away from her outstretched hand. I ran toward the front of the group, toward Ito and the Webbs, and the illusion of safety in proximity to people who were stronger and braver than me. I ran with the specific practiced selfishness of someone who has spent his entire life finding the exit. And I heard behind me, Nina didn't run. Nina went back. Nina grabbed Dolores under the arms and hauled her upright and supported her weight and moved, lurching, staggering, dragging an injured 70-year-old woman through a field of water bottles while the infected closed the distance from 50 yards to 40 to 30. Ito turned back. Dylan turned back. Marcus turned back. They formed a line, tire iron and box cutter against the approaching wave, buying Nina and Dolores the 10 seconds they needed to clear the debris field and reach the far shoulder. Everyone went back except me. I was already on the other side, untouched, unhurt, panting, watching the rescue I should have performed being executed by every person in the group who was not me. They made it, all of them, by margins measured in feet. And when they reached me, nobody said anything. Nobody had to. We found a pickup truck at mile 536 with keys still in the ignition. Ito drove. Nina sat in the passenger seat with Dolores, whose ankle was swollen but not broken. The rest of us rode in the truck bed, sitting on the corrugated metal, cold wind sheeting over us as Ito pushed the truck to 40 miles an hour on the increasingly clear shoulder. Nobody sat next to me. The truck bed was small enough that this might have been coincidence. It wasn't. Patricia held Marco between her knees, sheltering him from the wind. The Webb brothers sat together, shoulders touching, united in the particular solidarity of people who have fought side by side. I sat against the tailgate, alone, watching the highway unspool behind us in the moonlight. Each mile marker a countdown toward a rescue I hadn't earned. I want to tell you that I made a calculation, that in the moment Dolores fell, I weighed the options and concluded that my survival depended on forward motion and that going back, while was illogical, that would make me strategic. Cold perhaps, but rational. A survivor. But that's not what happened. There was no calculation. There was no decision tree. There was only the animal, the core of me, stripped of every social performance and aspirational self-image. And the animal ran, not toward danger, not toward the person who needed help, away, the purest expression of self I had ever produced. And it was a sprint in the wrong direction. This is the thing about crisis that nobody tells you. It doesn't build character. It reveals it. Every comfortable day of your life, you're wearing a costume assembled from the expectations of others. You're kind because kindness is rewarded. Brave because cowardice is punished. Generous because generosity is observed. Remove the observers, remove the rewards, remove every structure that incentivizes decency. What's left is you, the actual you. And some people discover their Ito, stepping forward with a tire iron and a quiet calm. Some people discover their Nina, going back for the fallen without hesitation. Some people discover their Craig, accepting a death sentence with dignity. And some people discover their me. Mile 539. The truckway station was visible ahead, a long, low structure with covered bays, normally used for inspecting commercial vehicles. Military vehicles were parked in a perimeter around it, their outlines unmistakable even in the pre-dawn dark. Headlights, activity, the organized movement of people who had a mission and the infrastructure to execute it. Ito flashed the truck's headlights. A spotlight from the perimeter swept toward us and held. A voice over a loudspeaker instructed us to approach slowly with hands visible. We were processed through the perimeter by National Guard soldiers who moved with the efficient fatigue of people who had been doing this all night. Medical check temperature, pupil response, inspection of exposed skin. Patricia went through first with Marco, then Dolores, supported by 2 soldiers who carried her to a medical station. Then the Webbs. Then Ito, who shook the hand of every soldier he passed. Nina went through ahead of me. At the checkpoint, she turned back and looked at me. Not with anger, not with contempt, with something worse, comprehension. She understood me completely, and the understanding had cost her nothing, because she'd never expected more. "You made it," she said. "Yeah." She turned and walked toward the medical station where Dolores was being treated. She did not look back again. I was the last one processed. The soldier checking me asked if I was injured. I told her no. She asked if I'd been bitten or scratched. I told her no. She marked something on a clipboard and directed me toward a transport vehicle that would carry us south to a staging area in Williams. I climbed into the transport. I sat in the back. Around me, strangers from other rescue points sat in various states of shock and exhaustion and grief. None of them knew me. None of them knew what I'd done, or rather, what I hadn't done. I was safe. I was alive. I was untouched. I had never felt less like a person in my entire life. Dawn came through the canvas walls of the transport truck in slats of pale gold, and I watched it the way you watch something beautiful in a hospital room, aware of it, unable to reach it. The truck rumbled south. Around me, survivors slept or stared or held each other. I sat alone with my hands in my lap and my duffel bag gone and my phone dead and nothing to show for 23 years of life except the knowledge of what I was made of. I think about Dolores's hand. Reaching up from the water bottles, the photograph that spilled from her purse, I saw it, even as I turned away. An old portrait, a man in a suit, probably her husband. She carried him with her through the end of the world, and I couldn't carry her across 10 feet of asphalt. I think about Nina, who never owed me anything and gave me every chance to be better than I was. I think about Craig, alone on a bus, giving his jacket to a child he'd never met. I survived. That's the whole story. I survived. And the cost was finding out that survival was the only thing I was good at, and the graceless, solitary act of saving myself. I carry that. I'll carry it until whatever comes next. Not as a wound, as a fact, the way you carry your own name. My name is Eli Marsh. I was nobody. I made it out. That's all.